Hi, in this video, I'll talk to you about questionnaire design. This is the stage one engages in when a decision has been made on what research design to use, and when there's a fairly clear idea as to what questions are to be posed, what issues are to be measured, any research questions or hypotheses that have to be assessed, and finally, a decision has been made on what types of scales to use to measure the constructs of interest. Here I'm going to go into the design issues of the questionnaire. Begin by, let's formally define a questionnaire. It's a formalized set of questions for obtaining information from respondents. A questionnaire in general must do the best possible job of translating the information needed into a set of specific questions that the respondents can and will answer. This part is hard, but nobody wakes up in the morning wanting to complete a questionnaire. So a questionnaire must attempt to uplift, motivate, and encourage the respondent to become involved in the interview, to cooperate, and to complete the questionnaire. To the extent possible, the questionnaire doesn't have to entertain the respondent, but at least draw their interest and again, keep them on task from the start to the end. Even respondents that are paid need to be motivated, simply because there are often respondents who might just want to blaze right through the questionnaire so as to collect their $1 or $2 or $10 they get for completing the questionnaire, with little concern about the content of the questions per se. And for that reason, again, you want to put in enough information in there to, again, motivate the respondents. Sometimes it might involve giving respondent information about why you're conducting the survey, or promising to share with them a summary of the results of the survey. But you must, as far as possible, again, try to motivate the respondent to stay on task with the questionnaire. Questionnaire should, of course, attempt to minimize response error by its formatting. And we're going to touch upon some of these issues as we go through the questionnaire here. The questionnaire design can be broken down into a couple of steps out here. I'm going to go through these in one by one. The first one here is to specify the information needed. So be very clear for yourself about what information is to be gathered. This is not what you're going to put in the questionnaire, but it must be written somewhere else separately, so you have in mind, again, what you want to gather. Oftentimes people have this preset notion that certain questions must always be asked in a questionnaire. I'm not a big fan of that line of thinking. If demographics is not relevant, don't ask it. Only ask questions that need to be asked. And you'll know what to ask if you clearly state what information is to be gathered. There's the issue of the type of questionnaire and administration method. Now, the question type and interviewing method are two different things. You might ask the same question differently based on the method for interviewing. So, for instance, non-comparative scales work well by email and mail, but if it's going to be in person or on the phone, having somebody fill out or address, answer a Likert type scale is much more difficult to do. And also gathering their information is also challenging. So, alternative ways should be thought of when for the question based on the interviewing method utilized. I'm not going to spend so much time on the other administration methods, because by far the most popular method right now for gathering data from respondents is web-based. So we'll focus specifically on web-based surveys here as we go through the issues surrounding them. Let's begin by looking at the issue of individual question content. The first thing to kind of note here is only ask a question that needs to be asked. You must always look at a question and ask whether the question is indeed necessary. If there is no need to know somebody's age for the research question at hand, then don't ask them their age. It doesn't have to be asked. So any questionnaire that you are able to remove, item you're able to remove from the questionnaire will shorten the questionnaire, thereby increasing the chances the respondent completes the survey. On the other hand, there are times when you might have to ask more than one question. One may not be enough. For instance, why do you use CREST? Now, somebody might say to reduce cavities, and somebody else might respond because our dentist recommends it. Right? So really, you can break the question down into two parts. Right? Instead of why did you use CREST, to how did you first happen to use CREST, and what is your primary reason for using it? And so one gets at how you adopted the product, or what drove you to adopt the product, and the second is why are you continuing to use it. Here's another example. There are times when you might have a double-barreled question such as, do you think Coca-Cola is a tasty and refreshing soft drink? It's called a double-barreled question because the question, in a sense, is asking about whether Coke is tasty and refreshing at the same time. While there's a good chance they're correlated, what if they're not? What if somebody thinks Coca-Cola is tasty but not refreshing? How should they then respond to this question? Okay. To clarify then, if there are indeed two questions here, it may make sense to break the question into two of them, such as, do you think Coca-Cola is a tasty soft drink? Do you think Coca-Cola is a refreshing soft drink? So if it's a double-barreled question, break it into two to clarify what is being asked. The other thing to kind of be concerned about is that the respondents may not have all the necessary information to answer the question. It turns out respondents will answer questions even when they have little or no understanding of it, because sometimes they feel it might be something familiar and respond anyway. Take, for example, people who were asked about Smile Bright toothpaste, right? In a questionnaire. Well, many of them indicated using Smile Bright toothpaste. It turns out there is nothing called Smile Bright toothpaste, but it sounds like a familiar toothpaste. So people responded agreeing that they actually use this toothpaste. Oftentimes people will answer a question that they don't know an answer to because they don't want to look silly. So in one example, respondents were asked about a made-up act, one called Consumers' Rights Act on Privacy of Internet Information. It is again concocted, not real. About half of the respondents indicated familiarity with this made-up act because, again, they don't want to look silly or foolish. And then there are situations where people may feel like if they don't respond to the question, they may look irresponsible. Take, for instance, a question asking respondents to offer an estimate of spending on family grocery spending. Now, the respondent might feel like if they don't know how much they spend on their groceries, they look fiscally irresponsible, and therefore it might be a face-saving response that they might want to proffer or give. Now, if the respondents don't have all the necessary information, it is a good idea to have a filter question that allows them to sift through. So, for instance, if the question is about toothpaste, or it's about a product they don't use, we'll ask them about product use in the beginning, and then only if they've never used the product, don't ask them about brands of that product, right? Furthermore, having a don't know option, it appears to reduce uninformed responses without reducing the response rate. Now, there are two aspects of this don't know option. One of them is if you have a don't know option, people might look at the don't know option in the survey, and they might feel like, okay, it's normal to not know the response to this question, and therefore, if they don't genuinely know the answer to a question like how much they spend on groceries, they may select the don't know option, okay? Because they might just look at the survey and feel like, well, that's reasonable to not know. Now, the flip side is, from a data standpoint, you got to bear in mind, anytime somebody answers don't know, that means you have a hole in your data. Like when you get to the spreadsheet form of your data, you're going to find out that there's a certain question that doesn't have a number associated to that. Therefore, it's a blank or a missing value. And that might create a headache when you get to analysis, figuring out, again, what in the world should I do with the missing value? Genuinely missing value. So anyway, we'll get to that issue when we get to the data analysis part. Just bear in mind right now, if people respond don't know to too many questions, you're going to have too much missing data, which will create analysis headaches. Our respondent is able to answer the question. Sometimes the phrasing might be such that it is almost impossible or not normal to answer the question, like, how many gallons of coffee did you drink last year? Now, it's very unreal. Nobody thinks about coffee in terms of gallons, even though gallons is a legitimate unit for measuring volume. Nobody will think about gasoline in gallons, but not coffee in gallons. So you can think about then breaking this question down into familiar units, like asking people about, well, how many cups of coffee did you drink in the past week? We can think in terms of cups, and thinking about the number of cups in a week or a day is easier than thinking about gallons of coffee in the last year. Clearly, when I talk about cups, there is an approximation built into it. Okay. Is a cup 8 ounces, 12 ounces, 16 ounces, or if is it like a Starbucks Trenta size 30-ounce cup? It's obviously a cup might vary drastically from 8 ounces to as much as 30 ounces. So when you ask about cups, you might have a certain approximation kind of thrown in, or even error thrown in to your measure. But you're better off asking a question that people have some shot of answering than asking a question that they have no chance of answering, like gallons of coffee. Clearly, no respondent is going to take the effort of figuring out the number of gallons of coffee I drank last year by figuring out volume and so on. Certain questions are just hard to answer, like describe the ambience of the restaurant. Okay, now describing the ambience is hard to do. Yes, you can have somebody write, open-ended response about this, or you can have them give them a rating scale or reference point, like bad, good type scale for ambience, and that might make the answer, the question more answerable. There are cases where the respondents may just not want to answer because they're not willing to answer. So, for instance, this happens when people feel like answering is going to take too much effort, or the question is sensitive, a question about something deeply personal, or one that is embarrassing or threatening to their self-esteem, like a question about the use of personal enhancement products of some sort. So there are situations where respondents might be willing to, might not be willing to answer a question, and you've got to now figure out, how can I make it easier for them to answer? How can I make it, practical and possible? So consider this example. So most respondents are just not going to spend the amount of time and effort to provide information. So list all the websites you shopped at over the past Christmas season. A question like that is asking respondents to put in the effort to think about all the websites they shopped at a few months ago, and then type them in. This requires both a cognitive effort, the thinking part, and then the typing effort, the physical effort of keep punching in all the websites they shopped at. This is not a good question to ask. Most respondents are just not going to want to spend that much information. So it's much better, you're better off giving them a list of websites they can check boxes from. In general, I'm a fan of having, as far as possible, check boxes, radio buttons, have people choose stuff in a survey. Don't make them type stuff. And just, if you have to make them type stuff, put it at the end of the survey, not at the beginning. The other issue is, is it something people are unwilling to answer, like a sensitive topic, right? So there's some things people just don't want to answer because it's so. If you've got a sensitive topic in a questionnaire, you want to push it way back at the end of the questionnaire. Having a sensitive topic up at the very beginning of the questionnaire is going to turn them off. They're going to get defensive. At worst, they might just close the browser window and say, I am going to abort answering the survey at this point, and you lost them. So the sensitive topic, make sure that by the time the sensitive topic comes, they've answered the bulk of the questions in the questionnaire. So should they decide to, at that point, close the window, you've got a lot of the questions already answered. You've got some data then. Now, there are, of course, a number of ways of overcoming the unwillingness to answer a question. So consider this example here. According to a study by XYZ, 1 in 4 males suffer from erectile dysfunction. Having given some background about this, hopefully that's, and you want to make sure that that study is real, it's not made up. You're encouraging people to then share information about something that they would be otherwise reticent to respond to. Using the third person technique is another fantastic way to get information from people. Asking people if they cheat on their taxes is invasive and is going to, make people defensive. On the other hand, if you pose a question in a third person form, like, do you think most people cheat on their taxes? Or asking them about other people or a made up fictitious person called Joe, then it again makes them feel a bit more relaxed about responding to the question. Another way I've found as being fairly effective in overcoming unwillingness to answer a question is to hide the question amongst many other questions. And this way, people are going through a lot of questions very quickly, and they will not, they'll answer the question. As far as possible, provide response categories rather than asking for specific figures. This is particularly true when you're asking about something like income or age. Don't ask somebody, how old are you? Blank, or type in your age or type in your income. Nobody wants to give exact numbers. Nobody wants to answer age or income questions in general. But if you ask them to offer a discrete value, they're even less likely to respond to that question. You can also consider using randomized techniques to, again, shuffle some of the questions around, again, to hide sensitive questions within a survey. Moving along now to form of response. There are many question types you can have. We've seen many types before already. Let's examine a few more here. Broadly speaking, open-ended, multiple choice, or matrix-style questions, and dichotomous questions. An open-ended question could look like this. How do you feel about the way in which websites gather personal information? An open-ended question is one where respondents have to type in a lot of information in response to a question. Now, most people don't want to type into a survey. So I'm, generally speaking, not a fan of open-ended questions because, again, you might lose the respondent. If you must ask an open-ended question, push it to the end, not at the beginning. When you're asking multiple choice questions, some simple things to kind of bear in mind. You want to make sure that the options are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. There are some exceptions I can think about, but generally speaking, a question like this for age with response categories is, clearly the researcher didn't think this through. Less than 18, 18 to 30, 30 to 40, and so on. What if you're 30, 40, or 50 years old? What do you say? Okay. And furthermore, it doesn't have a category for somebody who's above 60. I mean, is that reasonable to have that missing? And of course, the less than 18 is very, very, I don't know if that should even be there because there are laws about gathering data from those under 18. So that probably shouldn't even be there, right? Okay. And then there's, of course, the order of alternatives may make a difference in the response people give. So which of the following matter in your choice of an ice cream shop? Select all that apply. And here you have checkboxes here: distance, variety, flavors, price, reputation, courteous of staff, and so on. Again, the order in which you ask the questions makes a difference. So here you might want to think about jumbling the order based or randomizing the choices based on the respondent, or randomized choices in general, to address any order effects of the options provided. Here's a dichotomous question example. Do you plan to buy an electric car within the next year? Yes, no, don't know. In general, there are a few things that are, binary or dichotomous. So some things generally are, I get it, okay? But as far as possible, if something can be, if a question is measuring some level of an attitude or a psychological measure of some sort, it should be asked on a 1 to 5, 1 to 7, an itemized rating scale, okay? Dichotomous questions in general should be avoided. There are, of course, instances where they might be, like, do you have an electric car? You have it or you don't have it. It's pretty clear. Are you married? Yes or no? Don't ask that question, but some questions are pretty definitive in that there is a heads or tails, yes or no kind of answer to them. But if you feel a question like this one, do you plan to buy an electric car within the next year? It's not a yes, no. For some people, it might be yes, no, but you would rather gather the question on a 1 to 5 scale. Just because when you have data gathered in a 1 to 5 scale, you get more nuance on how people are, what their intentions are going forward. And so there's more variance to work with than with a yes, no question. So I'd kind of be inclined to, as far as possible, use itemized rating scales as opposed to a dichotomous question. Okay, moving along to question wording. So in general, there are some things that are simple, some things that are complicated. And what is simple to one person might be complicated to another person. What brand of shampoo I use personally is easy for me to answer. For others, it might be complicated because they may not just be one of them. So consider modifying the question based on the audience you are addressing the questions to. You might want to change which brand of shampoo you use to which brand or brands of shampoo have you personally used at home during the last month, considering that there may be many people, a family in a house, and they may use more than one brand. So in case more than one brand, please list all the brands that apply. And so this is clarifying again the issue. I want to do that as far as possible. Do you think the distribution of soft drinks is adequate? It's one of the questions that really bothers me. So what does adequate mean? Do you think soft drinks are readily available when you want to buy them is a much better alternative? In general, you want to keep jargon out of surveys. Keep the survey as simple, as understandable to your audience as possible. What is lucid and understandable to one audience may not be to another one. So step in the shoes of your respondents to think about what language will they get or understand as you think about wording your question, your survey items. I've seen this too many times. As recently as answering a doctor's survey a few days ago. Ambiguous words. So how often do you shop for clothes? Never, occasionally, sometimes, often, regularly. Okay. Never, yeah, we get that. How often you shop for clothes? Never, that means 0 in terms of a quantitative numerical measure. Occasionally. Occasionally for one person might be once a year. For another person, occasionally might be once a month. Right? So occasionally depends on who is the question is being posed to. Sometimes, often, all 3 of them regularly, or actually all 4 of those categories are subject to variation from one person to another. they're ambiguous. Avoid asking questions or having words that can be construed differently by different people. A leading question is one that clues a respondent to what the answer should be, as in the following. Do you think that patriotic Americans should buy imported automobiles when that would put American labor out of work? Okay. A leading question is one that's going to tip the balance in favor of one response. In this case, you're not seeking somebody's opinion, you're giving them an opinion, you're biasing their opinion. That's what a leading question is. As far as possible, you should avoid leading questions. Although, I can think about reasons why somebody might want to, let's say there's a group that is seeking a certain, they want some quantitative support for the argument they're putting forth. They have an agenda, basically. So they want data that would support their view, and they might, for that reason, put together a bunch of leading questions to get people to respond in a way that would favor their agenda and their idea they're trying to purport. Of course, this is unethical and wrong. So for many reasons, I would say you should not have leading or biasing questions, neither by accident nor by design. Avoid implicit alternatives. Consider this one. Do you fly when traveling short distances? Sort of like there's a reference point here that's not made clear out here. Do you fly when you like to fly when traveling short distances, or would you rather drive? Like compared to what? Similarly, avoid implicit assumptions. Here's one. Are you in favor of a balanced budget? And so there may be here an implicit assumption out here that people understand the consequence of a balanced budget. So are you in favor of a balanced budget if it would result in an increase in the personal income tax? Going on, avoid generalizations and estimates. So what is the annual per capita expenditure on groceries in your household? A lot of big words out there. Economists talk a lot about per capita and annual, but most people don't. Most people can't think about how much they'll spend per person per year on groceries. So you've got to break this question down into a form that people can easily answer it in. So asking the question about how much somebody spends on every trip to the grocery store, and asking them how many trips they make in a month, and how many people they have in their household. Breaking the question into sub-questions like this will enable people to respond meaningfully. And you can, of course, put the numbers together from there to figure out the answer you're seeking, which in this case is annual per capita expenditure on groceries. This is controversial. Should you have both a mix of positively phrased and negatively phrased items in your questionnaire? It's good to have a mix of positively and negatively phrased items in your questionnaire because it ensures that it's a good check and test to see that people are paying attention. And if you find out that people are responding similarly to positively and negatively phrased questions, you know that they weren't paying attention, or maybe the responses should be thrown out completely. The flip side is if you have all positive questions or all negatively phrased questions, then people can get through the questionnaire quickly. And it turns out that I've found personally is that if you have a mix of positive, negatively phrased questions, it tends to lead to lower reliability in your skills. So let me think about it. On to question sequence. How do you start a questionnaire? What do you ask first? What do you ask in the end? And so on. Here's something to think about. So in general, you want to invite people into the questionnaire. You want to draw their attention because most people that are going to drop off in a questionnaire will drop off in the first or two screens. So you want to invite people in by asking some really simple, interesting questions. non-threatening questions. The idea here is to draw them in. Sometimes you may even want to ask a question that has nothing to do with the survey, just to draw their attention. I know I said before, don't ask a question you don't have to ask, but this is one exception where you may ask a simple question just to draw them in. Once they get past the first screen, on the second screen, their odds of dropping off the survey decline significantly. Okay. The other thing to bear in mind is you generally speaking want to use a funnel approach to asking questions. Ask general questions first, specific questions later. For example, if my survey is about, let's say, Cold Stone Creamery, the ice cream shop, I might begin by asking about ice cream shops in general. From there, make my way into into the various kinds of the various ice cream shops. People rate different ice cream shops, and then maybe go into more specific, like ask them questions about the various attributes of an ice cream shop, like location, price, service, so on. So going from ice cream shop to, ice cream shops in general, to specific ice cream shops, to attributes of an ice cream shop. So we're going from broad to narrow, and therefore the funnel approach. Very important thing to bear in mind again, always go from category to brand specific attributes. Use branching with care whenever you're going to use branching in your survey. This is something that most survey software have built in, where you can send people away from the mainstream to side, but you want to bring them back at some point in time. So you want to use this with care. Demographics should always go to the end of the survey. I've seen this mistake committed too many times, where people are inclined to open a survey with age, income, so on. Never should you ever start a questionnaire with demographics. It is not only something that is personal, but also it's something that's likely to turn people off, and they're probably going to close the survey if they see demographics up front. So always push demographics to the back end. They're simple, easy questions to answer. And if you lose people at the very end, so be it. By then, you've gathered most of the relevant information up front. So demographics, push it to the back. Anything, a difficult question, a sensitive question, to the end. So typically, if I've got a sensitive question, I would put it right before demographics. Demographics itself should, of course, be the last question you ask in a survey. So here's an example of the funnel approach, about general questions first, and then specific questions. What considerations are important to you in selecting a coffee shop? In selecting a coffee shop, and how important is convenience of location? And then we go on to the convenience of location of Starbucks. So we're going from, again, general to specific, broad to narrow. When you're going to use branching, the question being branched should be placed as close as possible to the question causing the branching, so people can understand what is kind of leading out into the branching that they're being sent along. The branching should be ordered, that respondents cannot anticipate what additional information will be required. Okay. On to form and layout. As far as form and layout is concerned, just bear in mind, make a survey as good looking. Appearance is important to the survey. Use nice themes, use nice readable formats. Keep in mind the age of the audience. That might affect things like font size. Bear in mind what device somebody might be using for the survey. Are they using a computer device, or are they using a mobile device? That affects, again, decisions about appearance of your survey. Whether you have, again, the kinds of questions are going to vary based on whether a large part of the group is answering the survey in mobile or versus laptops. As far as backgrounds for surveys are concerned, I am of the opinion that only have a background in there if it is going to uplift and motivate. If it is going to in any way distract somebody from the text in the survey, don't have backgrounds in your survey. As far as having headers in your survey is concerned, like the organization name, if you want to have it, keep it really small. Any branding information in a survey takes up valuable screen space. I'm not a fan of those. I'd like to take those away as far as possible. And a shorter survey is a better survey. The KISS rule applies just as well to surveys as it does to everybody, every other thing in life. So yeah, shorter surveys are desirable. Once your survey is ready, you don't want to field it right away, because oftentimes you find out things that are wrong with it after launching it. So it's better to have a dry run of your survey, call it a pre-test. Pick a small group of people to respond to your survey and gather data, and then you realize there's some problems you overlooked, and you might get a chance to fix them in the pre-test kind of stage. Okay. Once the survey is, of course, gone through pre-test, you can launch it. So in this chapter, we've reviewed questionnaires and the process to design them. Thank you.